The great hall of the Blackthorn Pack had never been so full. Hundreds of wolves stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the carved wooden beams, their eyes fixed on the raised platform where Alpha Daemon Blackthorn stood beside a woman in a shimmering silver gown. Elena Voss stood a few steps below them, alone, her hands folded in front of her, her spine straight, despite the whispers rippling through the crowd. She had known this moment was coming. She just had not known it would hurt this much. 3 years ago, the moon goddess bound me to Elena Voss, Daemon announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall. But a bond is not always a blessing. Elena has failed to bring strength to this pack. She has failed to bring alliances. She has failed to be the Luna this pack deserves. Elena felt every eye turned toward her. She kept her chin lifted, refusing to let her face crumble. Tonight, I choose Priya Sandhu as my Luna, Daemon continued, taking Priya's hand and raising it into the air. She comes from a strong bloodline, and she will lead beside me the way a true Luna should. The crowd erupted into scattered applause, though many wolves shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Elena with something close to pity. Fated mates were rare. To reject one publicly was rarer still, and crueler. Daemon looked down at Elena as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience finally removed. You are no longer welcome in this pack, Elena. Your title is stripped. Your place here is finished. Elena felt the weight of his words settle over her like a stone dropped into deep water. She thought of every quiet evening she had spent trying to earn his trust, every effort she had made to be useful to a pack that never wanted her love, only her obedience. She thought of the nights she had cried alone in her room, while he trained with wolves who whispered about her unworthiness behind her back. She had given 3 years to a man who had just called her a failure in front of everyone she knew. But instead of breaking, something inside Elena went still and quiet, like the calm that settles before a storm. Thank you, Alpha Daemon, she said, her voice clear and steady. You have made my path forward very simple. She turned before he could respond, and walked out of the hall without looking back. No one saw the small, knowing smile that touched her lips, just before the doors closed behind her. What none of them knew, not even Daemon, was that Elena Voss had never truly been an ordinary pack wolf. She had been raised in secrecy after her family's kingdom was overthrown. When she was a child, Blackthorn Pack had taken her in as an infant refugee, hiding her identity to protect her from enemies who still hunted the last heir of the fallen Ashwood line. She had grown up believing, for a long time, that her past no longer mattered. Tonight, it mattered more than ever. 3 years passed. Blackthorn Pack, once one of the strongest territories in the region, began to weaken. Trade routes dried up. Old allies grew distant. Whispers spread that the pack had lost its favor with fortune itself, ever since the night their true Luna was cast aside. Meanwhile, along the eastern border, a new power had risen. The Ashwood Kingdom, once thought extinguished generations ago, had returned under the leadership of a queen no neighboring pack had ever seen unmasked. She was spoken of in careful tones, respected and feared in equal measure. Her armies were disciplined, her trade agreements were generous but firm. Her enemies, it was said, did not remain enemies for long, because she simply outmaneuvered them before conflict could even begin. Daemon heard the rumors, but he paid them little attention until the day Ashwood soldiers were spotted patrolling land that Blackthorn Pack had always considered its own. They are testing our borders, his beta warned him one evening, spreading a map across the war table. If we do not respond, they will assume we are too weak to defend what is ours. Priya, now fully settled as Luna, stood beside Daemon with her arms crossed. Send a message demanding they retreat, she said. We cannot allow this kingdom to think Blackthorn Pack has grown soft. But sending soldiers to enforce demands against an unknown enemy was a dangerous gamble, and Daemon knew it. Instead, he sent a formal request for an audience with the Queen of Ashwood, hoping diplomacy could resolve the dispute before it turned into something neither pack could afford. The response came swiftly. The Queen would meet him in 3 days' time, at her palace, alone. Daemon arrived at the Ashwood Palace with a small envoy, his pride bruised at having to travel to another ruler's territory, rather than negotiating on his own land. The palace itself was breathtaking, built from pale stone that seemed to glow faintly under the afternoon sun. its halls lined with banners bearing a silver wolf crest he did not recognize. He was led through wide corridors toward the throne room, his boots echoing against polished floors. Guards on either side of the entrance pushed open two enormous doors, revealing a chamber filled with soft light and quiet authority. And there, seated upon the throne at the far end of the room, was Elena. For a moment, Damon was certain his eyes were deceiving him. The woman before him wore a deep blue gown, embroidered with silver thread, a crown resting delicately atop hair that had once been simple and unadorned. Her posture was regal, composed, utterly unlike the woman who had once stood trembling before his pack 3 years ago. Yet there was no mistaking those eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at him with hope, now looking at him with nothing but calm, unreadable distance. "Elena," he breathed, forgetting for a moment every formal greeting he had prepared. "Queen Elena, of the Ashwood Kingdom," she corrected gently, though there was no anger in her tone, only quiet certainty. "It has been a long time, Alpha Damon." Damon felt something twist deep in his chest, a mixture of shock and something he refused to name. "You are the queen everyone has been speaking of." "I am the queen everyone has been avoiding," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "There is a difference." He stepped further into the room, his envoy hanging back near the entrance, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "How is this possible? You were raised in my pack. You were hidden," Elena finished for him. "My family's kingdom was overthrown when I was a child. Blackthorn Pack took me in and kept my identity secret to protect me from those who wished to finish what they started. I did not fully understand my own history until years later, and even then, I chose to remain quiet, hoping to build a life that had nothing to do with thrones or crowns." Damon's jaw tightened. "You never told me." "Would it have mattered?" Elena asked, her voice steady but pointed. "You made it very clear, in front of your entire pack, that I was not worth keeping, regardless of my bloodline. Sharing this with you would not have changed the outcome. It may have only given you another reason to see me as something to be used, rather than someone to be valued." The words landed with quiet precision, no shouting, no dramatic accusation, simply the truth laid bare. Damon opened his mouth to respond, but found he had nothing to say in his own defense. "Your soldiers were seen along the border," Elena continued, folding her hands in her lap. "I assume that is the true reason for your visit." Damon straightened, trying to regain some composure. "We believed Ashwood was testing our territory. We were simply patrolling land that has belonged to my family for generations, long before Blackthorn Pack claimed it as its own," Elena said calmly. "I have no interest in unnecessary conflict, Alpha Damon, but I will not allow my kingdom to be threatened either." For the first time since he had entered the room, Damon felt the true weight of his position. He had come expecting to negotiate with an unfamiliar ruler, prepared to assert dominance if necessary. Instead, he stood before the very woman he had discarded, now holding more power than his entire pack combined. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. Elena studied him for a long moment before answering. "I want peace between our territories, but peace built on fairness, not fear. I am prepared to offer a treaty that protects both our lands, provided Blackthorn Pack acknowledges the rightful boundaries of Ashwood territory and ceases any further incursions. And if I refuse? Then you will find that Blackthorn Pack's weakened alliances will not be enough to withstand a conflict with a kingdom that has spent 3 years growing stronger while yours grew distracted," Elena said, without malice, simply stating fact. "I do not say this to threaten you, Damon. I say this because it is true, and I would rather you understand the reality clearly than walk away believing you have another choice." Damon felt heat rise in his chest, old pride resisting the truth in her words. But beneath that pride was something else, a slow, sinking realization of everything he had thrown away the night he humiliated her in front of his pack. He had believed rejecting his fated mate would prove his strength as an alpha. Instead, it had cost him the one person who might have stood beside him as an equal, strong enough to lead a kingdom of her own. "I will need time to discuss this with my pack," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "Take the time you need," Elena replied, "but do not mistake my patience for weakness. I have learned, since the last time we spoke, exactly what I am worth." Damon returned to Blackthorn Pack, carrying more than a treaty proposal. He carried the heavy knowledge that the woman he had cast aside as unworthy had risen to become someone he could no longer look down upon, someone whose approval he now desperately, foolishly, wished he still had. When he informed Priya and his council of Elena's true identity, the hall fell into stunned silence. Priya, to her credit, said nothing accusatory. She simply looked at Damon with quiet understanding, recognizing that the title of Luna meant little in the face of a queen's authority. "We cannot fight her," Priya said eventually, "not when she holds every advantage, and not when you gave her every reason to become someone unwilling to show us mercy." The following week, Damon returned to Ashwood alone, without his envoy, without the formal armor of Alpha authority. He stood once more before Elena's throne, this time carrying the signed treaty in his hands. "Blackthorn Pack accepts the terms," he said, placing the parchment before her. "And I accept full responsibility for the mistakes that led us here." Elena took the parchment, reading it carefully before setting it aside. "Thank you, Alpha Damon." He hesitated before speaking again, something raw and honest slipping past his usual pride. "I was wrong about you, Elena. Not just about your bloodline, but about everything. I let my own arrogance convince me that rejecting you would make me stronger. Instead, it showed me exactly how much strength I never truly had." Elena regarded him for a long moment, feeling the echo of old pain rise briefly before settling back into stillness. There had been a time when hearing those words might have shattered her further, or perhaps rebuilt something between them. But too much had changed. She had rebuilt herself into someone whole, someone who no longer needed his validation to know her own worth. "I appreciate your honesty," she said softly. "But some bonds, once broken by choice, cannot simply be mended by regret. I wish you well leading your pack, Damon. I truly do. But my path now belongs to my kingdom, not to what once stood between us." Damon nodded slowly, understanding settling over him with quiet finality. He had lost more than a mate that night in the Great Hall. He had lost the chance to stand beside someone capable of true greatness, someone who had transformed her humiliation into unshakable strength. He left the palace without another word, carrying the treaty and the weight of his own mistake back to his pack. Elena watched him go from the tall windows of her throne room, feeling not sorrow, but a quiet, settled peace. The girl who had once stood trembling before a crowd, stripped of her title and her dignity, was gone. In her place stood a queen who had built her own worth from the ashes of that humiliation, answering to no one but herself. As the sun began to set over the Ashwood kingdom, casting warm gold light across its silver banners, Elena allowed herself a small, genuine smile. She had walked away from that hall 3 years ago, with nothing but her pride intact. She had returned as someone far greater than anyone in that room could have imagined. And for the first time in a very long while, she was finally completely whole.